Hello, guys. Good evening, all. Hope you had a wonderful day so far. So, we are live right now. Finally, this is our proposed webinar. UKRST is just to give an idea about radiology and the training program. Uh, so, I'm Jaren. I'm one of the ST1 from in Birmingham. I'm a representative for UKRST as well as ST1's associate rep in West Midlands Imaging Academy. Uh, I'm I'm taking this opportunity to introduce two of my senior colleagues who has been the flag bearers for UKRST since I know about this group, and who has been extremely kind enough to share their space and time and knowledge to help every one of us. So I think I just want to introduce Abira Khan and Asim Kabuli, who are senior radiology doctors. Abira, it's all yours.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jaren. And hi, everyone. Welcome to the UKRST event. I'm Asim Khan Kauli. I'm a consultant neuroradiologist. I'm the founder of UKRST, and I'm very glad to see you all here. Our chief organizer is Dr. Abira Khan, who is a very passionate advocate of radiology training, and she has done amazing work over the past several years to help trainees. Just to give you a brief overview of UKRST and what we do. So we started UKRST about 5 years ago, and the aim was to help more people join into the amazing field of radiology. And we have nearly 6,000 members in our Facebook group. And as you know, we also have a dedicated WhatsApp group. There are nearly 700 applicants this year, which is great. We organize mock interviews for candidates every year, which runs over like 10 or 11 days. And candidates have found it extremely useful. And over the last 5 years, we have had nearly 300 members from those interviews who got into training from our group, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm really very proud of that. We have also had great success at ST3 interviews. And what we do with these interviews is the amount that we collect from these everything goes to charity. For example, last year we donated all the amount to the earthquake victims in Turkey, and we also donated to the RNLI Coast Guard, which helps refugees. So it's quite a useful thing. So I would like to think that we are doing some good in the world. Yeah, and our support doesn't stop at ST1 and ST3 recruitments. We continue to support trainees and non-trainees throughout the radiology journey. We have a dedicated WhatsApp group for trainees, which has more than 300 members. We also continue to provide support for fellowship and consultant interviews. So it's more of a long-term relationship that we have, which is wonderful. I wanted to really highlight one thing. One of our core values is to help others and to pass it on. And the prime example is this event. It is being delivered by radiology trainees who are once candidates like yourselves. So I really hope you find this event helpful. And I'm really looking forward to having you all as radiology trainees. And hopefully you will help us deliver more of these teaching and training kind of events, which will help a lot more people. So thank you all for coming and joining. And finally, thank you all organizers for taking time to do this. It's much appreciated. You're doing a wonderful job. Abira, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Asim. So Asim has basically covered everything about the Facebook groups, and we are also trying to expand the program now. I have got lots of really great ST1s who have organized this webinar. So hopefully we're trying to recruit UKRST reps now in every deanery, and through that we're trying to do some more projects, hopefully for next year now, because we're quite short of time now. So because the portfolio criteria has significantly changed, so we're trying to incorporate more like essay competitions or more poster competitions through UKRST, which will help you at least for next year. I have some good team members, and I'm sure they will take it forward. We'll just go through the introductions for all the speakers now. Jaren, we'll start off with you, and then all the people who are doing like MSRA, and then Jaren will also go through the feedback, the format of the session. And the feedback forms we will send at the end of the webinar. Please fill in the feedback forms, which are really, really important for the speakers and also for us, so that we can improve, and then hopefully for next year and for upcoming more webinars, so we know where to improve. Okay, thank you. Enjoy the session. Over to you, Jaren.
Yeah, thank you, Abir and Asim. Guys, just reiterating on what they have said. So they came over here to the UK. They went into the training program, and they wanted to inspire people like us. I think last year or 2 years ago, I was exactly on the same position as all other members who are joining here, who had an idea about radiology. So UKRST significantly helped all of us, all of the people, those who here listen to speak today of ST1 radiology in different parts of the UK. So you're getting their lifetime advice on what they found best, and hoping you can use their personalized advice to your benefit at some point. So just reiterating, I'm one of the ST1s in Birmingham, UKRST rep and an ST1 rep for my West Midlands Imaging Academy. And just going through the schedule, I would say, so to get into radiology, you have different sections that you need to focus on as a junior doctor. It is the exams, which is MSRA. It's the interviews, which you need to get at the end. And the something which you have to start prepping very early is the portfolios. So everything has its own weightage and benefits. So we have different people who have scored quite good at what they are, and different sections, and they're going to explain about what they found best, and they're going to just elaborate on that. So for the first session, without further ado, I think it's better if we start the section first. And I hope during the sections, the speakers would speak about themselves and introduce themselves. So we are starting with the most important part, which is the exams, what we call as multiple specialty recruitment assessment exam, which accounts for 40%, and it plays a big role in deciding whether you end up being a radiology registrar or not. So that's why for that we have Thun. He is one of the ST1s, and I'm just introducing him in UCLH, and he's going to start speaking about his experience and what best way forward to MSRA. All right, Thun, over to you.
Okay, nice to meet you all. Yeah, I'm going to give a short talk on my experiences in sitting MSRA. If you just move on to the first slide. And apologies for my webcam. My internet's not that good at the moment, so I'll just have the audio. But for context, I was born in the UK. I did my undergraduate MBBS at Barts, foundation training at Birmingham, and I applied to radiology during F2. I only made one application to see how I did, and I unexpectedly ended up ranking in the top 1% of applicants. But ultimately, the stuff I'm going to tell you in terms of my experiences should be taken with a pinch of salt. Thank you. I would suggest you save your questions for me at the end, or in the dedicated Q&A session, because there's quite a lot to cover. You just next slide. Okay, so with that being said, the MSRA is a computer-based exam lasting about 170 minutes long, consisting of two sections. First of all, the professional dilemmas paper, which you have 95 minutes for 50 questions, and clinical problem-solving paper, which is about 75 minutes for 86 questions. These sections are independently timed, and you can't rush the professional dilemmas. For example, in 30 minutes, you spend about 140 minutes on CBS. That's not possible. And you always have to do the professional dilemmas before the clinical problem solving. You do get a 5-minute break in between the papers, which you should obviously use. And there's no negative marking, so answer all the questions. I believe the dates for this cycle are January 4th to 14th, 2024. As already alluded to, it should be stressed that this exam is ultra crucial to your radiology application. And you should be really taking, it should really take priority between now and January. You have to realize that radiology is becoming increasingly popular, with competition increasing year on year. Last year, I was up against 3,068 applicants. Even this year, there may be even 4,000 applicants, let's say. The main hurdle is that this is the main hurdle because your MSRA score will shortlist you for interview. and also have a large influence on your final rank when added to your portfolio and interview score. I know some colleagues who had decent portfolios scoring 30 plus who didn't get shortlisted for interview due to bad MSRA scores. Next slide. So the clinical problem solving section should be the bulk of your revision, as I will allude to later. All of the 86 questions will be based around a clinical scenario. Roughly half will be in the format of extended matching questions, which give 8 to 10 answer choices you have to use for different scenarios. Each scenario is usually of the same speciality. And the other half of the questions will be single best answers for a single scenario. As you can see, there's a wide range of specialities tested. You can see that this is mostly pertaining to medical specialities rather than surgical. But note that the reproductive health includes male and female sexual health and obs and gyn. The questions will be focused around 5 domains, such as investigation, e.g., what is the best investigation for patient? Diagnosis, as in like what is the most likely diagnosis? Emergency, i.e., what is the first line management in this emergency scenario? Prescribing related questions such as what is the first line antibiotic choice, and sort of general management of conditions such as like what is the gold standard treatment. And next slide. So my experience in talking about my experience in particular, I actually started revising quite a lot, 4 months, starting in mid-September, 1 hour a day to begin with, increasing to about 10 hours a day in the last few weeks. I had the benefit of that. My first rotation was in acute medicine, which gave me a lot of working knowledge day to day. But because it was so busy with the nights, it was difficult to revise. My second rotation was in forensic psychiatry, which was actually very relaxed and chill. I was not doing much. So it's really good to get the leave and time off. For those of you F3ing, you should have no problems with revision time in that respect. So in terms of question banks, I tried all 4 popular question banks available to me at the time, and ultimately stuck with PassMed and MCQ Bank. It was important to say that I also supplemented these questions with reading around the topics to actually understand the question, rather than just pattern recognition. You also have to realize that at the end of the day, like, everybody is going to do the same sort of question banks, sometimes even 2 or 3 times. So I wanted a bit more of that edge. Personally, I did PassMed once, repeated all my incorrect answers, did MCQ Bank twice. I focused on covering breadth and not depth. At least I did this first, and then I made sure that I knew all common things and easily testable stuff, like similar to what I was tested on in finals. It can be demoralizing to begin with, especially seeing as this, for some of you, may be your first exam in multiple years since med school. Next slide. Yeah, so my verdict on question banks in particular, I found past medicine to be a sort of great starting point. It had a large amount of questions and also quite nice textbook functionality to read around the answers. The most important thing was that for me, it had all the up-to-date guidelines. There's also a knowledge tutor function with spaced repetition, which is really good because I was quite lazy at the start. They had 2 mocks at the time, which mirrored the Pearson VUE interface and was quite representative of the actual exam. You have to realize that a lot of people are going to use PassMed as a starting point. MCQ Bank was very close to the exam. They actually had some past questions previously asked, but the interface was quite dry, as you had to score like 40. You had to score like 78 pages of text in one go. I found eMedica and PassTest a bit too obscure and high level, and did not reflect the guidelines, which didn't really help me in revision. Next slide. Yep. So the resources I used to supplement my learning were the Oxford Clinical Handbooks, the Cheese and Onion, and also the Oxford Clinical Specialties Surgery book. And this is basically the highest level of detail you would need to know for the exam. It can be dry, so I read one section in one day. And I ultimately felt like my clinical practice as an F2 would even improve even if I did not get into radiology. I also used the USMLE Step 1 First Aid book. And in particular, it had several pages of rapid review buzzwords shown in the image, which were really good. And it's really, really quick fire revision at the last couple of days. I also used USMLE Med Bullets, which was also a good website for condensed information in bullet format. And next slide. So there exists an official whole practice paper online for 2022, but I felt that this practice paper was a bit too easy compared to the real thing. After my sort of reflections after the exam, I felt like it's worth noting that a lot of the questions came randomly from a pool. So I didn't get the same questions as other test takers or my friends. In my sitting, there were pilot questions, but these were impossible to tell. I felt that some questions were vague, with subtle wording such as the nature of the pain described and sort of subtleties of the age of the patient, which made things quite difficult. And most of the times, I was torn by two equally plausible, correct-sounding answers. Not all questions were sort of GP presentations, contrary to common belief. In my exam particular, which is of course randomly allocated to me, I had an abundance of pediatric sexual health and ophthalmology for some reason. Sometimes even like two or three sort of question sets all related to ophthalmology. Next slide. So this is a slide of some areas I would revise if I had to sit the exam again. A fair few did not come up in my case, but I would still regard as being high yield for any sort of sitting. Unfortunately, some people are known to revise the sort of vaccination schedule and child development stages. I actually spent considerable time of revising this via muscle memory. I didn't actually get any questions about it in the end. But the reason why I think it's important is that these do feature in PassMed and MCQ Bank. It's also important to note that in the real exam, they may give normal values, but there are questions which want you to identify whether a lab value is either a severe, moderate, or mild level. So, for example, like hypercalcemia, for example. So it may be worth revising. Next slide. And moving on to the professional dilemmas, you have 50 questions and 95 minutes, as I've said. Of these 50 questions, around half will be ranking questions, where you rank the order of the 5 responses in terms of their appropriateness. The other half will be, the other 25 will be multiple choice questions, where you select the 3 best responses. Again, all of these will be based around a different singular clinical scenario. This section is supposed to test the professional attributes of professional integrity, coping with pressure, empathy, and sensitivity. And you have to answer these as if you are an FY2. It's important again to note that the answer to these questions will probably not reflect real clinical practice. And it's what you should do and not what you would do in real life. Next slide. I can probably basically, from my sort of experience doing the professional dilemma section, I can proudly say that I can proudly say that I revised 4 months of CPS, but less than 4 days of professional dilemmas. And my message is to you is that don't waste time revising too much of the professional dilemmas. The reason is that I felt that the exam was so subjective. It's so obscure, and I feel like the time could be better spent revising for clinical problem solving, where marks are more clear cut. So for me, I only did the SJT papers from the foundation program SGTP papers, which were more or less a similar level, and the singular 2022 MSRA practice paper available. I also read the Good Medical Practice document, but I felt this is quite generic. And doing these sort of 4 days of revision, I felt that these didn't help me at all, and I could have come out with the same score with no revision whatsoever. So I really hate this exam. You'll find that most answer choices are vague. They're not clear cut with no clear right or wrong. And when you look at the rationale in these official resources, which are again limited, when you look at the rationale, even the rationale contradicts itself within and between the past papers. So it's really it's quite difficult to revise for. One thing I can say is that not many people, it's quite controversial, but even worse than doing no revision is doing revision from unofficial resources, as they will never be representative of the real exam. So don't do. I didn't want to do like question banks from the SGT question banks from like Past Med or eMedica. I felt that courses covering the SGT and PDR, in my opinion, were an absolute waste of time and money, partly because they will use scenarios that are not official, or will basically go through the past papers all over again. And in the real time pressured exam, you don't have time to sort of debate and think too hard about the answers when compared to scrutinizing scenarios in a non-exam setting. So the pressure really, the pressure's there. I would also not advocate discussion groups for professional dilemmas, as the people who you're revising with probably don't know any more than you do either. I do admit though, if, for example, English is not your first language, it's worthwhile to sort of familiarize yourself with the style and subtleties of professional dilemma scenarios, but don't get too hung up on it. And next slide. So the generic advice I used for these professional dilemmas, again, it's so subjective and didn't really apply. It's not really tangible. It's like you have to answer questions like you have to answer the scenarios like a martyr. Even there's one that had you'd have to sort out the rota on your annual leave. Yeah. And patient safety should always be the number one priority. You should know your responsibilities and limitations as an FY2 doctor. The answers that involve exploring and seeking information rank highly in general. You should take responsibility when witnessing wrong practices, and you should raise concerns with the person involved. And handovers should be ideally done in person and with direct communication. And communicating to the patient directly is generally preferred than relatives. And you should involve seniors, of course, as appropriate. So that's some generic advice. It's probably not going to be too useful because you can't apply it to every single scenario, and each scenario is contextually different. So it's probably, but that's what the generic advice most people use, and I sort of used, but didn't really help me. And the next slide. So there's some just important logistical considerations that will sort of make the MSRA process quite easier. You should book the test center early. Invitations typically will occur in mid-December. You should know that there's only a finite number of slots. So if you book late, you may have to you have to travel quite far to that test center. You should also look at the reviews of the test center beforehand on Google reviews, because it's Pearson review. Some invigilators can be a bit grumpy, and they can be a bit more strict. And you should plan leave and swaps well in advance. In my case, I took 9 days of leave. I probably would have not scored high without this. And also, the last thing you want to be doing is like MSRA after on-call or nights. You should familiarize yourself with the Pearson VUE interface as well. So I use Reddit quite a lot, but it would be advisable not to troll Reddit in the exam period. There's quite a lot of scaremongering posts of the MSRA which put people off as well. And as I've said, you should take the optional 5-minute break after the first professional dilemma section. Like if you're applying to multiple specialities such as like GP or ACCS, you may get your results faster. You may get your MSRA results faster, and this is beneficial as you obviously can start interview prep earlier if you know you've got a decent score. I know some people who actually applied for GP just to get their MSRA score earlier, and then they withdrew the application for GP and persisted with radiology. And the final slide, next one. So my main takeaways, I know that I'll cover this quite fast, is it's a high stakes exam, but focus more on critical problem solving, which is more objective than the more subjective professional dilemmas. You should start revision earlier. You should start revision early, i.e. now if you haven't. You should use question banks and supplement them with notes. And you should also get leave to make your life easier. So yeah, that's my talk. Thanks very much for listening. And if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or we can answer them later.
Thank you so much, Thun. That was an elaborate talk about how to crack the MSRA exam. And I would really listen to him because he did score really high. And I can see, as all you can see, is that the amount of materials and amount of options that he have explored before going to the exam was really quite good. And I think that made him stand out as well. So that would be thanks for the good piece of advice, Thun. Abira, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you, Ton. That was really great presentation. So I know you have stressed a lot on the clinical part, but I know as an international graduate, I really struggled with the professional dilemma questions, and lots of people keep asking. So I just wanted to ask you guys, like others, Amin, Jaren, and did you find any other resources helpful? Because I know he said that he cracked it in 4 days and because he didn't over prep, but some people feel they're not really good at it. So any resources that you guys found really helpful? Like any good medical practice from GMC or any books?
I think the most useful thing for me was using the UKFPO SJT past papers. So this is the official foundation program in the UK who write the exams themselves. They have, I think, 2 or 3 full-length mock exams with explanations for each question. So there's well over 150 questions to go through. So you can derive the logic quite well from them. So that, for me, to be honest, was the only resource I used for the professional dilemma section, as opposed to generic question banks and external resources.
I think it's the same here, because I was an international medical graduate, and the expectation of the professional dilemma is that you be an exceptionally well doctor, which at some point is not practical enough. So when I gave the exam first, some scenarios which come up, that I don't think it happens in the real world, but that is expected of you from GMC. So I would stay a bit differ, because I've often heard people say that you don't have to go into a lot of materials, but stick with the generic ones, like the GMC guidelines. That's the final thing. But what I did was that for my second exam was I did go through a lot of materials which helped my brain fine tune and pick certain subtle variations of the question, which helped me at the exam day. as Thun mentioned, it's a split-second decision. You have very less time with a lot of questions to cover. So I just going through a lot of materials helped me personally. But I think people need to figure out what kind of learner they are. Do they want to stick with one or few materials and learn the basics, or do they want to fine-tune their brain to a lot of scenarios? And when they find a scenario, something similar, they can probably increase the probability of marking the right questions in the right order.
Okay, thank you. Oxford SGT, someone is asking, would you recommend? I think it was a good book. I studied it. So Nandini, you were asking, what is a good score? I think Amin has answered. I think because the percentile is quite going high, so at least try to focus, get at least 540 plus. Like make a mark, pass medicine or pass med, they are both the same. Someone is asking, can I book exam in Pakistan? Do you know overseas exams? I think there is a center, but it is quite, the slots are quite limited. So if you're booking not in the UK, then you have to be quite quick in booking the slot. Otherwise, you might not get it. I think we are answering questions
I think
on the way.
As per the schedule, can we just move on to the next one?
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, guys, we would be answering the questions. We would have a look into the chat box as well, and also there will be a final Q&A session. So keep your questions. So we are moving on to the next important part, which is the radiology portfolios. This is one thing which you have to start quite early. Some people take years to get this to make sure you stand a good chance out there. So we have Amin. He would be speaking about the portfolios, and he would be personalizing it and might bring in few tips and tricks what he did to achieve this thing. So Amin, over.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So my name is Amin. I'm a ST1 trainee at Southend University Hospital based in South Essex. And I'll be going through the portfolio section. So the portfolios in radiology traditionally were quite thin. There wasn't much to it. You could theoretically wake up one day and decide 1 week before the deadline that I'll apply for radiology if you get a decent MSRA score. Because there was only 5 domains, there was 10 marks maximum to get, and each of the domains were extremely generic. You just need to get an audit, you just need to do a taste a week, you just need to do there are things that you may naturally accrue throughout your foundation doctor training or even medical school studies. And then what happened in 2023 applications, so this time last year, or just a bit closer to December, the Health Education England released a new portfolio requirement, a sort of a new benchmark. And essentially, this completely changed the way portfolios work. It made the domains from 5 to 7, and it also increased the amount of marks available from 10 to 45. And so there was a lot more detail in the portfolio and a lot more things were required. Now, obviously, the biggest reason why this probably happened was because the surgical applications for CST now require MSRA as a requirement. So you need to get a certain MSRA score that counts towards your CST applications. And what a lot of people do on the Oriel platform is they tend to apply for multiple things at the same time. So if you have a decent MSRA score, somebody could apply for radiology, CST, GP, ACCS, anesthetics, everything. And as a result, what you get is an inflated number of people applying for radiology and no way to tell between who is serious and who isn't. So the theory is that the portfolio was made a bit more stringent and tight so that it weeds out the people who are not as serious about radiology and make it a bit more fair. The portfolio, as mentioned earlier, is 30% of the overall mark, and MSRA being 40% and the interview section being 30%. And the portfolios are something that you need to start from quite early. You cannot accrue everything in time for the applications, because everything that you build in your portfolio has to be completed by the time the applications close. The domains are as followed, so I'm going to go through each of them one by one. with a screenshot of the actual 2023 specification and talk about how best to accumulate it. So the first section is commitment to specialty. So this section is marked out of 10. It is the largest section in the portfolio section. So 10 out of 45 marks is commitment. And how do you show commitment to specialty? The best way, or the most common way that everyone knows, is via a taste a week. And it needs to be a significant exposure as well. So what is the definition of a significant exposure? It is something that is 3 days or more. I'll try and answer them towards the end of the questions towards the end, but a good portfolio score would be around 30 plus if you want to differentiate yourself from other applicants. So significant exposure is 3 days minimum consecutively. And the types of exposures are taster weeks, and there is a difference. A taster week in a DGH and a taster week in a tertiary centre are two different exposures altogether, because in one area you're looking at a general radiology department, another area you're looking at a subspecialty sort of section of radiology. So those are two separate ones. Some people do SSE modules. So in the UK medical training or in medical schools, they have a student-selected component, which is sort of like a module in university. And if you pick a radiology-focused one, that will count as a exposure. And another one may be, some people do clinical lab projects, which involve spending time in a radiology department. That could be nuclear medicine, that could be in a PET center, that could be MRI. It could be any sort of project which is radiology focused, and that is also a separate exposure. And some people even do intercalated BScs in imaging sciences, which is quite a popular BSc when I was in medical school at King's College London. And that can also be a different exposure. So you need at least 2 different exposures. That would be multiple. 2 is minimum different exposures for 3+ days. That would give you the 10 marks. And what you would do is you would develop a certificate at the end of your time, or you can get a letter of recommendation from the department head, the consultant, whoever is in charge, as your evidence. The next one is leadership and management. So this is a new-ish section that they added. And in this section, essentially, it goes from 0 to 7, where it's about leadership in a generic sense, and to the highest level is leadership regarding radiology at a higher level. So in the lower ranked marks, you can see if you're part of any society of any kind, it could be a student society at university, it could be a generic society outside of university, your local clubs, whatever. And if it's local/regional, then that will qualify you for the 2 or 3 out of 7 sort of grade. On the right of the column, you can see examples, and the examples are actually quite good. It tells you pretty much the sort of things that they're looking at. Now, obviously, to qualify for the higher marks, what you need to do is you need to make your leadership and management geared towards radiology, because they want to see that you're interested in studying radiology. So, for example, a good example would be being part of a radiology society at university. That would be immediately, if you look at the section, at 5 out of 7, hold or have held a local regional leadership level or managerial level involving radiology. So that would be an undergraduate radiology society. That would probably be the easiest way of doing it. If your if your hospital, wherever you work, might have a sort of a research group or a group of fellow residents who are interested in applying for radiology, you could form a group out of it. You might have an overseeing consultant, and that could be a form of involvement in radiology. For some people, they might be involved in healthcare from a sort of a non-radiology point of view. They might be part of the Royal Society of Medicine or a part of a surgical society. That's something that you might have thought about doing before you made the switch to radiology. And if you were involved with that at a national level, a bit more than regional, that can also be worth quite a lot of marks. So the idea is, how do you define again your level of involvement, whether it's regional or whether it's managerial or not? that would be up to the person who's giving you the certificate or the commendation. So whether it's a human resources department or a consultant, they will obviously detail in their letter or in their commendation what level of involvement you had. Did you organize people? Were you part of recruitment? Did you organize events for the society? That sort of thing. So that's leadership and management. And then the next part, actually, I'll answer the question that Aya asked. Does working in radiology department overseas many years ago count as radiology exposure? So if you were when you say many years ago, this is one thing I didn't actually mention in a slideshow point, is that your experiences up to this is according to 2023, it might change this year, but this is going off the latest guidance. Experiences of up to prior to 10 years from the day that you're applying count. So if you've done something within the last 10 years that is relevant to the portfolio and you can develop evidence for it and submit that evidence, that will count, basically. So it doesn't have to be in the last 1 or 2 years, essentially. Okay, so the next section is teaching and training. So this is regarding, now this section is not about simply teaching. It's not simply just teaching, like I did a presentation about ECGs to some medical students. To hit the higher marks, it's about organizing teaching and being involved in a teaching program. So a very common sort of thing that medical doctors might get involved in is a local teaching program for foundation doctors. So in the UK, most hospitals have an education centre, and the education centre always hires or elects 1 or 2 representatives who will organise a teaching program for FY1, FY2 or medical students that are attached to a hospital. Being involved in something like that is being involved in a teaching program, and that will get you good points. So going through the sections, if you're involved in absolutely nothing and you've not even taught anybody or have evidence of teaching, that'll be 0 points. Evidence of providing organized teaching or training, so i.e. you did some kind of teaching, will only be 2 out of 5. And then if you made a major contribution, and again, major contribution is going to be defined by the person who is giving you the evidence, which is the certificates and the letters that they might write for you. Major contribution to a local or regional teaching program, that will give you 4 out of 5 points, which is a good return. And then the highest level is national or international teaching program, which might be a lecture series that you do online, which is attended by people around the country or around the world, for example. And you were involved in organizing it, which may be recruiting teachers, setting up the online platform, chasing people for feedback, providing certificates, some form of contribution that you've made, which is distinct and notable. And the teaching events that you're running have to span for at least 3 months. So it cannot be a solitary lone event. Can't just be a one-off teaching event that you got involved in. It has to be something that has some level of consecutiveness. And the first and the last teaching session should be a minimum of 3 months between each other to show that there is a significant amount of involvement, essentially. And I would recommend that whatever letter of commendation you get, mentions these date ranges so that it's unambiguous when you're submitting evidence. Now, the next one is a formal teaching qualification. So this can be a bit trickier to get. So if you're one of those people who were once upon a time a teacher back in the day, and you've chosen to change your career path towards medicine, and back in the day you got a master's in medical education or a PGCE or something like that, then you will qualify for max marks, 5 out of 5. The reality is most people don't have that. So they might have a PG cert or a PG diploma in teaching. And for example, people who do the academic foundation program in the UK, which is F1, F2, but your F2 year is usually split between education. They usually award you a PG certification alongside it, and that would give you 4 out of 5 marks in this section. But the reality is not everybody is an AFP candidate, and not everybody has a master's in medical education. So in my position, I couldn't get either of the 2 top marks. I had to figure out how to get at least 2 out of 5. So evidence of another training or teaching method. So They give an example of a online course you can do called Train the Trainer. And this is a link that I've put on, and I'm going to post it right here on the chat function. So this is an online course that you can do in your own time, where you can basically go through the course. It's a generic course about how you train people and how do you teach somebody to be a teacher to others. It's probably information that a lot of us know, but formalized, and you get a certificate at the end, which you can submit to get points for, and you'll qualify for the 2 out of 5 at least. Some people might want to do a PG cert. That's completely up to you, but PG cert requires time, effort, money as well. I think in the UK, a PG cert costs about £2,000 to £3,000 if you want to do it on your own. And is it really worth it for 2 points on a portfolio? Probably not, if that's your only reason. So doing that would be quite good. On the link, it might say that you should pay for it or that it costs a certain amount of money. But if you have an NHS login, because you work in the NHS, then there's a way to access the teaching course for free, actually. So don't rush to paying for something like this, because it might cost a bit of money as well. So the certificate that it auto-produces is evidence enough as well. The next section, I'll just speed up slightly, is audit and quality improvement. So audits are essentially a way. So to qualify for the max points, you need to get involved in multiple audits. Multiple audits being 2 or more, and the audit has to be related to radiology. And the audit has to show that there's an improvement between the first cycle and the second cycle. So each audit has to have 2 cycles. So audit 1, you do 1 cycle, you do a second cycle, you present it. And then you do a second audit, first cycle, second cycle, you present it. And between the cycles, you have your intervention. If you're struggling for ideas of what audit you should do, what is available, how do I develop my methodology, or so on, the RCR has a audit template section where it literally gives you a example of how to develop an audit about this topic. And there are many audits that you can pick from. So I'm going to drop another link on the chat, which you can save. And this, you can use it as inspiration to develop your own audit for your own place. And if you were to present it at a local audit meeting within your hospital and get a certificate for it, that would count. But on top of having a certificate for presenting the audit, you also need to have a letter of commendation I would recommend getting from a consultant or audit lead at your hospital to show that you were a lead in that audit. So what does a lead mean? What's a lead role in an audit? It is presenting the audit, it's being the person who generates the idea and develops methodology, or it's somebody who does a lot of the data collection. These are all lead roles. So what I would say is pick a couple of audits on that template list, apply it to your hospital, do a first cycle, a second cycle, present both of these audits at your local hospital, and then try and get a certificate for the audit and also a commendation from the audit lead to say that you were heavily involved in this, and that will help. But there has to be a second cycle. You can't do a first cycle and present it because you haven't shown an improvement. There should be an improvement. What the improvement is it can be a 1% improvement. It doesn't really matter, but there just has to be a start and end. Moving on quickly, academic achievements. So again, this is quite robust. The academic achievement section is about presentations and publications. If you have a postdoctorate, PhD, or an MD in research, or then that will give you the max marks. But the reality is most people won't have that. And then if you have a publication related to radiology as a first author, that will get you the next highest level of mark. A best way to get that is by publishing case reports, and the European Society of Radiology is a good place to attempt publishing radiology-based case reports because they have a fairly good turnover. They respond to you fairly quickly if you publish something. Of course, there is an academic rigor to it. They won't just accept anything, but there will be a good vetting process, and they don't take months to get back to you. So if you get something presented there, that will give you 4 out of 5. If you go one lower, 3 out of 5 is what I got for this section, because I had a publication that I presented during medical school and I had published, which was not radiology related, but I was the first author. So that is what I had. And for me, I didn't pushed too hard to go to the 4 out of 5 section because I didn't feel like it was worth the effort. I would have rather put my more time into revising for the exam rather than pushing to possibly get rejected for a case report and then get accepted, or get rejected and then be in this middle ground. So if you have a publication which is non-radiology related, you have to be first author. It cannot be a non-radiology publication where you are second or third or fourth author. You have to be first author. Another way around it is if you presented a poster of some kind. So if you presented a poster related to radiology at a national or international level as the first author, you can get 3 out of 5. Or if you presented a generic poster of any kind, surgical, medical, whatever, that will give you 2 out of 5. And then 1 out of 5, I think, if you're serious about radiology, you should try and aim as high as you can. 1 out of 5 isn't worth discussing too much. The evidence for a publication publication can be the actual publication itself. On the website, the link of where the publication was posted, or if it's a conference that you presented at, then a certificate of presentation at the conference as well. The full publication document, does it have to be DOI or PubMed? Doesn't matter. You just doesn't have to be PubMed. It just has to have a DOI. Or to be fair, it just needs to be on a journal of some kind. It's not that strict. The next section, the last one actually, is prizes and awards. So this one can be a bit tricky because there's a big discrepancy between the second and the first ranking, because 6 marks and 3 marks can feel like a bit of a drop. So to qualify for the 6 out of 6, you either have to have a distinction in your medical school studies. This can be either for your written exams, your OSCEs. It doesn't have to be for both. Or you have a prize awarded from a national or international radiology related conference. Now the prize can be something like the best poster or best oral presentation or top 20 posters of the conference, something like that. If you don't have something radiology related, then we go down from 6 to 3, where at that point it can be non-radiology related. So it can be a local presentation where it was ranked as really good, or you might have received some sort of prize money or a physical gift or something that shows that you were exclusive and you were picked out as one of the best of a bunch. It could be best FY1 of the year, best FY2 of the year, that sort of thing. That would be a prize at a local level, and then more than one prize at a local level. And then a regional prize could be like a regional audit meeting that your audit was regarded to be the best at a regional level. If you got distinction in year 3 and year 4, would this count? Unfortunately not, because it says final year of your primary medical degree. So it has to be a overall distinction or if it's a bit annoying because you could get distinctions from year 1 to 4, but because you didn't get it in year 5, that doesn't count. So unfortunately, it has to be in the final year. Now, good conferences that you can aim for is BIR. That is one. Radiology Residence Forum is a newly established radiology group that is based in Essex that do a yearly conference now that you can try to submit to, and it's an international conference as well, online international. ESR do a annual conference that you can try and publish to, and RSNA as well do a annual conference that you can try and present something to as well. So those are good international conferences to aim for medical student / end of medical school, medical doctor / end of medical school level. And as mentioned, regional is deanery, local is just the university or the local hospital. So just some generic tips, because I have overrun a bit. You need to start early. Definitely start early, because as I've mentioned, one thing I completely forgot to mention is that the leadership and management section, the place that you're involved in, the management that you're involved in, the group that you're part of, you need to be a part of that group for at least 6 months. It has to be 6 months of minimum by the time you're applying. So when I say start early, I say start early because you need to meet minimum quotas anyway for the leadership and management section and for the teaching development. And at the same time, you want to be able to get the time to do your publications, to present things, to chase the certificates and so on. That can be a bit of a laborious process. Second thing is that it's quite easy to pre-calculate your marks, actually. If you know what you're aiming for and you can target those exact places, you can pretty much tell what you're going to get. So, if you know, for example, okay, I've passed the MSRA, I got an okay-ish score, I didn't get too high above the cutoff, that means I need to try and get a really good portfolio score to offset my MSRA score. Or, for example, I did really well in the MSRA. Okay, maybe it's not worth me doing too much work on the portfolio. I can concentrate more on my interview and do well in the interview. So you can play around with it. If you get a good enough MSRA score, that gives you access to worrying about these things, basically. But it's a bit of a game that you have to play. The next one is pick and choose your battles. So as you can see, some of the thresholds between 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5, or 3 and 5 out of 5, some of them require a lot of work just to get to the next level up. If it's too much work and you can get those points somewhere else, I would do that instead. You don't want to waste all your time trying to chase portfolio tick box exercises and then, not do well in the exam and just absolutely don't get an offer at all to begin with. So you need to pick your battles wisely. Again, as I mentioned, collect your evidence as soon as possible, start early. And also, when you do collect your evidence, your certificates and your letter of commendation, make sure you label them clearly and make sure you name the documents very clearly. Because when you are allowed to upload your evidence onto the online system, they're going to be looking at these documents and they're going to be looking at the names of the documents. And so you don't want to open up the opportunity for them to make a mistake and misinterpret what you've uploaded and therefore not give you the points that are rightfully yours. So you need to eliminate all chances of external mistakes happening. But inevitably, mistakes will happen. And so the last section, or the last point is, don't be afraid to appeal. So this is further down the line. For example, my portfolio score was 38 out of 45. And I predicted that I would be able to get 38. However, when I got my initial marks, ratified marks, I was given 33 out of 45. So obviously I was cut off by 5 marks, quite a lot in the grand scheme of things. And there was clear mistakes in the way they interpreted some of my evidence, because they give you a small document explaining why they gave you certain marks for certain sections. So all I did was appeal. I explained that, maybe there was a human error in the explanation of, human error in the interpretation of my evidence. And so I think you should look into this. What I said meant this, not that, and so on and so forth. So you have to appeal it. If you get given a certain mark, don't just take it on face value. Appeal it, and you'll get those points back. And that's what I did. I appealed it, and I went from 33 back up to 38. And without those points, I probably wouldn't have gotten into my deanery of choice. So those are the main things. Hopefully that was all clear. Feel free to add more questions on, and I will obviously answer as the other speakers go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin. Indeed, that was quite elaborate. So, guys, what I have to say is that for people, those who are looking into it first, don't get overwhelmed. All of us have been there. We have done it, which means it can be made possible. So make sure you know what you have. Take a piece of paper, write it down, go through the sections what you have just mentioned, and make some plans which is practical and time bound, which can be achieved. And you can get high scores, you can get low scores, but try as much as possible. So without further delaying, I'm just inviting our next 2 speakers who have been enthusiastically answering all the questions. So Gian and Afan, over to you. So this is the next session, which is interview, which is also counted 30%. So Gian and Afan.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Afan. I'm one of the ST1s working in Thames Valley based in Oxford University Hospitals.
And I am Gian. I'm also one of the SD1s working in Oxford University Hospitals.
So we're both going to talk about interviews today. What we wanted to start off by mentioning is that both of our journeys and both of our approaches to interviews was very different. So I came straight through from F2, and luckily for me, my hard work paid off and I managed to get my first choice deanery the first time round. Gian has a slightly different journey, which was maybe helpful for you to hear.
Yeah, so I actually did 2 years of surgery before and then a year of psychiatry, where I didn't get into radiology first time and I reapplied and I got in this time. So I think my interview this year was made really much better based off my experience last year.
Okay. So we're going to first start talking about just the interview format in general. Keep in mind, this is the interview format as it was in 2023, so the year that we applied. It may change slightly, so I would keep an eye out for that. But it's most likely going to be an online interview. Initially, you'll have an ID checking station where there's a non-radiologist who will just look at your ID, make sure you're the correct person. And then you'll be moved on to the interview with 2 panelists who will be radiologists, and that's when your interview timing will begin. That other person will still be there, mainly for timekeeping, and they'll be keeping their camera off. Could we go to the next slide, please? So in terms of the actual interview, it's a 15-minute interview, and you won't be allowed to go past that 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, they're going to be asking you questions on 4 different domains that I've put in this table here. The different domains have different amount of time allocated to them, nominally, and different amount of points. In terms of the time allocated to different domains, some interviewers may be very strict with this time. My interviewers were not. They allowed me to go slightly over each individual domain because they had some follow-up questions. But again, when it came to the 15 minutes, I was cut off. In terms of the scoring, I've put the points for the different domains there. Each of the 2 interviewers will score you independently, giving you a total score out of 30. At the end of the interview, if you have taken less than 15 minutes and up to a maximum of 1 minute, if you'll be able to just add in any supporting or additional information. So if you weren't able to talk about it in a specific question or a specific domain, then this is your chance to just put in that last little bit of information that you really wanted to show off. I took a little bit longer on some of my questions, so I didn't get this time. But I still managed to get a very good interview score. So if you weren't able to say something in this last minute, it's really not the end of the world if you still had a good interview before all of this. Can we go to the next slide?
So general tips. So I'd say the most important things are to really prepare. So for questions 1 and 4, these are the 2-minute questions, and they're looking mostly at why radiology and your skills and attributes. And these are really easy to prepare for. 2 minutes is a very short amount of time, especially if you're under pressure, talking to consultants. So this is something you should be really prepared for, to the point. For questions 2 and 3, they normally ask about softer skills such as coping under pressure, uncertainty, communication, reflection, and therefore you want to prepare ideas and stories that you have gone through where you can talk about these skills, so that when it comes to the actual interview, they ask you about a time you had to be organized, you come up with your scenario, and then you can talk about you being organized. Again, I say the most important thing is practice with anyone. Don't just practice with your friends, because I practice with consultants in my hospital, and there was an element of pressure and unfamiliarity, and this is something that you have to get used to for the interview as well. Presentation, this is something to think of a bit later, but where you carry out your interview, the lighting, make sure you have a camera, etc. And remember, you're applying for an ST1 level job, so if you are perhaps more experienced, more senior than other F2s here, your answers based off the questions they give you are what they would expect you should do at an ST1 level, not necessarily ST3 or ST5. Next slide, please.
Sorry, what I'd want to also add to that is that when we say prepared, we don't mean have a script. They can tell when you have a script, and what we'd recommend is have bullet points, have ideas that you want to talk about. This way you come off a lot more genuinely, and it's not robotic. And it also means that if they ask a question that has a slightly different skew, that doesn't match the script that you may have prepared, you can still answer in a very organic way. But now let's move on to talking about the actual questions. So the first question is about the commitment to specialty. As we said before, this is essentially why radiology. So even though a different part of the scoring for your ranking is portfolio station, the consultants who are interviewing you have no idea about this. So I thought of this as my portfolio station, and I used it to really sell myself. I use the self-assessment and the person specifications as a guide of what to include, but they're interviewing you. They want to get to know you as a person, so you want to make it personal to yourself. Don't and base it off your previous experiences. Because a big part of this is they want to find out not only are you someone who would do well in radiology, but they want to see are you someone that they would be happy to work with. So some suggestions that we had is exposures to radiology, any publications and presentations, prizes and teaching. And again, make sure this is really well structured. The way that I did this personally was that I had about 5 things I wanted to talk about myself. My research, my publications, my exposures to radiology and teaching. And one more thing I can't quite remember. But the way I did this was that I structured this so I had the things that I had the highest priority for first. And I used those in the first 3 in the first question. And then what I wasn't able to talk about, I used in the last question. And again, because I had these bullet points, regardless of how they asked me the question, I was able to talk very comfortably in a way that answered that question and felt very natural to both them and me. Can we go to the next slide?
So this is the second question, and this is the 5-minute question. So the one they asked last year was about coping with pressure and uncertainty. And the way I like to do it is you give an example of when you had to cope with such pressure and uncertainty. You talk about what you did, how you did it, how you escalated, and the outcome. And then you describe what you learned from the scenario, what skills you learned, for example, being better communicator, being better at planning, being better at organizing. And then you can then use those skills to talk about how that would make you a better radiologist. And I say that the thing that makes you stand out compared to other candidates is linking everything back into radiology. So for example, if they ask to give you a scenario with coping under pressure, you can talk about when you had a busy on-call, you had to manage a busy on-call list and all the jobs, and then reflect back on your time when you're shadowing the duty radiologist in your taster week and how those skills are relevant. And I think that way you show the examiners that you really understand what a job in radiology is like. As before, make sure you prepare 2 or 3 examples, because coping with pressure and uncertainty is what we had last year, but it may not be what you have. They might ask other skills like organization or empathy or communication, where you want to be able to give the scenario and just adapt it slightly so that you can talk about the skills that they are asking for specifically. Next slide. Okay, so team involvement is also another 5-minute question. And this one typically talks about something ethical and knowledge of systems. So these typically are supervision, radiation safety, patient safety. They may relate to radiology, or they may just be something quite general, like patient safety. I think for this question, I approached it by having a structure as well. So I divided the answer into 3 groups. So for example, if the scenario was that you were the SD1 and the radiographers come up to you saying a patient has been scanned incorrectly, they had the wrong scan. So there are 3 groups here to look for. Yourself, what you would do, your colleague who is in the radiographer, what you should do to support them, and the patient, what you should do to support the patient. So the SPY structure really helped me here, and I won't go into SPIs as something that you can look into your own time. But making sure you address all 3 groups, make sure you answers the question holistically and comprehensively. And again, you want to reflect this back to something that you've seen in radiology. So for example, with the patient being scanned incorrectly, you can talk about patient safety, you can talk about supporting a colleague, but you can also talk about using a realm meetings in your taster week and how you would refer this onto a realm meeting so you could discuss it in the future so that you can prevent this from happening again. So I'd say look at the person specification for 2024. Probity is a new thing that's been added on there. And if if the scenario is your colleague comes in drunk, or you see him lying about something, and then you could tie what you've learned from the scenario regarding the probity to what they're looking for in a person's specification, and therefore give a better answer. Next slide, please. You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So the last formal question that they'll ask you is about attributes and skills. And the way that I interpreted this is them asking, what do you bring to the table? So with this, I wanted to include both practical skills and soft skills. So not just that you've done lots of research, but things about how you'd work well in a team and how you'd be able to move into a new environment and adapt to that and work with the people there. And talk about how that would make you a better radiologist. An important part for this is don't just make statements, use examples. All of us are hardworking, all of us are dedicated, and all of us can say that. If you are able to use examples, that will really flesh out what you're trying to say. As I mentioned before, my approach was that whatever I wasn't able to fit in out of those 5 or so points I wanted to make about myself, I put in here. And again, I made sure this was really well structured. So if they asked me a follow-up question that took away one of those points that was leaving till the end, I still had those bullet points to be able to go through and talk about something else instead. And again, it just came across very organic rather than a robotic script. And they were able to build that rapport. We were able to build the rapport even though it was only a 15-minute interview. And I believe that was part of what gave me a higher score. Could you go to the next slide?
So the final minute. So this one really depends on your interview. So my interviewers are quite strict with time, so I had this final minute, but your interviewers might not be so strict with the time, and you may not have this minute in the end. But in general, I would suggest that you elaborate on further something that you've already mentioned. So if you've talked about your publications or audits in the first question, and you didn't mention that you presented it nationally, then this is something to raise here. Additionally, if you have something really impressive on your CV, like you've done some national teaching or you have a PhD diploma in medical education, but it's not previously come up, then this is the time to talk about it as well. I would also say do not ask any questions at this point. Anecdotally, I know someone who asked the interviewers what they thought of academy versus traditional schemes, and the interviewer just said that this is something that you should know yourself. So I'd say to be safe, just don't ask any questions.
As I mentioned, I didn't have this final minute because the rest of my interview took a little bit longer. So the thing I wasn't able to talk about was my teaching. So an entire part of the person specification and the portfolio that I wasn't able to talk about. However, because I was able to prioritize the points that I want to talk about and went in order for what I found more important, I was able to make sure that the more important things were put on there. And after the interview, I felt more at ease that what was based personally off of me, this less important thing was missed out rather than something more major. Can we go to the next slide? So we thought we'd talk about some common topics to revise that we think could come up. Some of this is radiology based because even though you're not expected to have a lot of knowledge about radiology at this point and to day-to-day workings, it's very fair for them to expect you to have done some research and have some basic knowledge about radiation protection and safety. The rest of this are things that would be that you could expect any F2 to know about and be able to talk about. So not only radiation protection and safety, but as we mentioned before, escalations of concerns or incidents, a colleague who may be acting unprofessional, and also things like consent and capacity. So make sure that you're covering a wide range of these things in the things that you're brushing up on. Next slide, please. And we just wanted to end with some helpful tips and resources. So practice is probably the most important thing that we can say. Obviously, most of this practice is likely to happen in person with your colleagues and your friends that you see in real life. However, because your interview is online, make sure you practice online. So I was literally on opposite ends of my living room doing an interview with my flatmate last year, and the interface of using the computer is very different to real life. So it's really helpful to do that. You may get different advice regarding whether you should look directly into the camera or whether you should look at your screen. And people will disagree on this. I personally look directly at the screen because then for me, seeing the faces of the interviewers made me connect with them more and felt more like a conversation. However, other people would say, and this is very valid, that if you look at the screen for the interviewers, they feel that you're speaking directly to them. In terms of practicing interviews, there are practice interview sessions. As I mentioned in the beginning, UKRST holds practice interview sessions, and this is something that I did as a candidate last year. You may also be able to go to your local radiology departments like Gian did and try to get consultants and radiologists to help you there. And there are other resources like Radcast. What I want to say is that if you're unable to, because of time or cost, if you're unable to go to these practice interview sessions, then that shouldn't make you feel like you're going to do much worse than other people. The difference that it made for me was that I was able to prioritize different things and I had more practice and was able to be a bit more reassured. It was not a night and day difference before and after this practice interview session, but it was helpful for me personally. Helpful books that we could recommend would be the two that I've got here. So the one with the skull on, the radiology interview book, has some of those radiology specific things. And that helped me get a brief understanding of some of the things that they may have asked about. The other one, medical interviews, this goes into a bit more details and has a lot more of the generic common questions that may not be radiology related, and also goes into detail about the stars and spy structures and other things like that. However, you can also do this from a Google search. And again, there are other books that may be also very helpful. And sometimes you may not even need to use these books, and use different resources that you can find online. But these are what helped the two of us. So I think that's all that we have for our session. Thanks for listening. Good luck for everybody. I hope that the next sessions will also be very helpful and we'll answer any questions when we have the time.
Thank you, Fawn and Jian. We had our two speakers who gave their interview experience and gave their tips. Guys, in simple terms, just put yourself in the interviewer's shoes and think what you would want to expect from a candidate. Do you want to listen to a set of memorized words and sentences, or do you want to listen to something natural which comes out of them? So focus on that. Read the person specification and then try to personalize it. There must be something which you can relate to in your day-to-day living. It might be in your personal life, it might be in your medical life. So that would really help you to stand out. So that being said, any one of you guys who want to hone your skills in academic as well as clinical radiology, we have our next speaker who is an academic clinical fellow. So without wasting much further time, I'm inviting Tom Sayer. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Jen. So my name's Tom. I'm an ST1 and academic clinical fellow at Cambridge. So I'm going to talk about ACF applications to radiology. So some of it will be from my experience, but recently I've met with a few of the ACF tutors, people who are doing the recruiting, scoring applications and the interviews at Cambridge. And so a lot of what I'm talking is tips I've garnered from them. So hopefully that should help. There's a lot to cover, so I won't necessarily go into a lot of detail, but hopefully it still help. So just to quickly recap what an ACF is. So it's the same as any other clinical radiology training program in the sense when you start, you'll be an ST1. However, 25% of your time will be protected for research or academia. So it's another opportunity to get a training post. These posts are kind of separate from the national trainings, national application. But this year, for example, I think there's only 6 or 7 posts in the entire country. So I'll talk a bit through the application, but the first thing is to remember, don't neglect the clinical application if you are applying for an ACF, because even if you are offered one, you still have to meet the minimum threshold for appointability in the standard national clinical application. So you still need to try and do well on the MRSA interview and portfolio. If you're applying this year, you should already know the applications came out in the beginning of October, but it's also worth checking Oriel regularly because, for example, my post came out 2 weeks later because it was a local post and I nearly missed it. And if you're particularly interested in a certain training scheme, have a look on their websites, and they can often give information about their ACF posts if they have any, and it's a good place to go. Also, make sure that wherever you do apply, because when you apply for these, you are applying for a specific training scheme, that you're happy with that training scheme from a clinical point of view. You might love the academic side, but you also have to be happy if it's an academy or not an academy, that you're still going to be an ST1 there, and predominantly you will be clinical. So you have to really be happy with the location as well, not just the fact that you want to do academic stuff. The most important thing is to read the NIHR ACF guidance. So this is one of the most transparent applications and interview processes and scoring that you probably will ever have in any job. It tells you what they're scoring and how they're scoring. It tells you what they're going to ask you in an interview, and also the order they're going to ask you in an interview. So you can be well prepared for it. Next slide, please. So the first part is the oral application, the shortlisting. So that opened in early October, and if you're applying this year, the applications deadline is the 1st of November. If they put on a bit later, the deadline may be a bit later, but that's the kind of, for the majority of them, it will be the 1st of November. So if you're not applying this year and you're thinking next year, you can still go onto Oriel, look, and you can preview the applications to look at the questions they ask. And so they're generally their white space questions. So they text for you to write and describe and explain things you've done. And it's all the kind of the typical things you'd expect. Talk about your research experience, audit, teaching, and leadership, etc. Similar stuff to the portfolio, but it allows you to kind of describe stuff. So the other thing to note is that posts, there's different types of posts. So most will be what's called a competition post. So that means that for that single ACF post it will be a competition between a radiologist and 2 other specialties. So for example, Cambridge may have an ACF post which only one person will bear to get. It could be a radiologist, it could be a oncologist, or it could be a cardiologist, for example. And all those 3 specialties can apply for that same post. So there won't be one of each that gets it, only one of them. So you're not just competing against other people who want to do radiology, but also other specialties who want to do academic. There might also be local posts, which will just be a local radiology ACF post. So there won't be a competition, it will just be within radiology. And also some posts will have a theme, an NIHR research theme. So they often outline 6 or so priority themes that they want clinicians to do research in. So I'll explain later on why that's important to know. So for the shortlisting and for the application, is the key thing is make it easy for them to score you. The guidance tells you how they're going to score you and what the criteria are. So try to make it as easy for them. So this isn't to scare you, but I know, for example, my post, there were 180 applications for the single post, and it's the same 1 and 2 people reading all these shortlisting applications and scoring them. They're going to get probably quite tired of reading all these different applications. And so if you can tell them the first couple of lines what they need to hear to give you the max score, then they'll thank you, and then it will make it easier for you as well. So next slide, please. So for example, hopefully you can see this on the left. These examples are some of the scoring criteria for the shortlisting. So on the left about teaching, if let's say you don't have a higher education teaching qualification, but you do have a formal teaching role, in that section, I would start with, I had a formal teaching role in, and then explain. So it really makes it obvious which score you should be getting or trying to get. Likewise, for the top one, talking about prizes, if you've got 3 undergraduate prizes, start that section saying, I have 3 undergraduate prizes as follows, and then list them. And then the bottom right, if you've had several presentations at international level, first line of that section, say, I've had several presentations at international level, and then go on to describe them. So they already know which section you're trying to get, and they can go, yeah, that was several presentations, 4 points, so they don't have to read much more. Next slide, please. So the other thing is to read the Appendix 2 in the guidance. It tells you all the essential and desirable criteria, and the specific job descriptions for each ACF post will also have these. So some of the marking criteria isn't as objective as some of those I just said, and it's a bit more subjective about how your experience comes across. But trying to hit these points will be really very useful. what I did was speak to ACF leads. So before I came here, I worked at UCL, and I knew the radiologist who led the ACF applications there. There wasn't an application that year at UCL, but I was able to talk to him about what he looks for, show him my application, and he can give me feedback. So it doesn't even have to be a radiologist. If you know anyone who's involved in the ACF applications where you are locally, or you can find someone in a completely different specialty, the criteria are exactly the same no matter the specialty, but the subjects might change. So get them to have a look at your applications, ask them for advice. That's what I would say. And the other thing is to include your practical experiences and not just your achievements. Of course, it's important to list your publications and prizes and presentations. But what I would do is write all those kind of things down on a piece of paper or on a Word document. But then within each one, break down what did you do to achieve that. So let's say you did a research project. What did I do to get that publication? Did I write any grant applications? Did I apply for ethics approval? Did I do the statistical analysis? Was I consenting patients or producing patient information sheets? Did I run some kind of patient participant involvement group? Things like that. And if you can write those down later on, it'll be very important. And that's what's going to set you apart, because they're the practical skills, which is they're agnostic to radiology, that will kind of, no matter who's interviewing, will go, oh, they've really engaged in the academic process and they understand how it works, rather than just say, I have this first offer publication. What did you do to get that publication? Next slide, please. So once you've submitted your white space questions and they've scored you, they set a cutoff score for each post individually. So it changes, it's not a set cutoff. They basically pick it so they interview up to 5-6 people max per post. So it's quite a lot of people weaned down after the shortlisting to interview. So the interview will happen somewhere between November and January. It's different for each post. And if you apply to more than one post, you'd have an interview for each individual one based at the local site. So it'll probably be virtual still, but the people in the room will be from the place that you're applying to. So who's there? So if it's a competition post, there will be a clinical academic from each of the 3 competition specialties. So there will be one clinical academic radiologist, but there'll also be an oncologist and a cardiologist, for example, if that's the other 2 posts. There will be another likely clinical academic who's part of the general clinical academic team at the site. Again, they may not be radiologists, and they're the 4 people that score you. So they all score you independently and their scores are added up. So the chances are only one of the 4 people are going to be radiologists. So you've got to make sure that you can sell yourself to academics of all flavors, which is why I said the importance of those kind of radiology agnostic skills, those kind of generic research skills that you've engaged with. There might also be there will be a layperson there who won't score you, but it's to check that the interview process is fair. And there may well also be an NIHR representative to check that they're adhering to the standards and the guidance. So as I said, you can prepare your answers and you can prepare them fully, because they're going to ask you the questions which are in the guidance. And they're going to ask you probably in that exact order. So you know what they're going to ask you, so you can prepare. And you should note what all the scoring for each of the questions is in the guidance, and I'll talk through some of them. But note how each of the questions are weighted. They haven't all got the same marks. Some of them are out of 16, some are at 8, and some are out of 5. So you may want to spend more time on some of them higher scoring answers and less on the others. And the reason I say to kind of keep in mind that and to prepare your answers and have an idea of how long you want to spend is for these 3 reasons. So one is, don't expect them to have read your application. So the radiologist in the interview probably did read your application, but they may have forgotten most of it, or it may have been a while ago. The others may not have seen any of it. So assume they know nothing about you. So even though you listed all your publications or achievements, you need to say them again. Don't expect them to ask you follow-up questions. So the advice I was told was, if they have these questions they need to get into and there's not that much time. So if the first question you speak for a couple of minutes and you stop expecting them to maybe ask you a bit more about what you said, they may just go on to the next question. So that's just why I say, kind of say what you want to say, everything you want to hit, but keep in mind the time. And then don't expect them to interrupt you. So again, you might speak for 10 minutes on the first question, and you've got 5 more to go, but they're not necessarily going to say, you should move on now. So look at all the questions, decide how long you want to speak on each of them, and kind of practice that. Again, you don't want to be robotic and rehearsed, but I think it's better to make sure you get everything you want to get across in a good time, because it is so standardized and in the way it is scored. Next slide, please. So the first 2 questions of the interview is about a data set, or publication. So the 24 hours before the interview, they will send you a generic data set or publication. It won't necessarily be radiology related. I got 2 figures, so this is one of the figures I got, and it could be about pretty much anything. So you have those 24 hours to try and prepare. So obviously have a look, think about what you think of the figure, what does it show, what do you think it's trying to portray, discuss it with other people. So I showed it to some statisticians I worked with previously, and I got their opinion about it. I was like, what do you see from this figure? I practiced presenting it to them, and seeing, getting feedback from them. And likewise, you need to present it to a lay person as well. Tell someone who doesn't know anything about medicine very briefly, what does this graph show and what is it trying to say? You might be able to find the original data source, which, please do, but they know, these are often public data sets or public figures, they will know if you verbatim read the description or wherever it is on the website that it's held on. So it might be good to kind of get you thinking about what the original source talks about for that figure, but try to have a bit of your own idea and an own way of phrasing it. So I'd recommend describing it and then interpreting it. So telling you what kind of graph it is, what's on the axes, what do the different colors or lines mean, for example, then say, what does it actually show? What are the differences it's showing or trying to conclude? And then you might want to suggest a few reasons why that might be the case. So you might want to pick 2 or 3 things that the graph is trying to show, if that is the case. Next slide, please. So these are the 2 scoring systems for those first 2 questions. The one on the left is asking you to present it to a scientific audience, and on the right to a lay audience. So note how you get up to 16 points for the scientific and only 8 for the lay person audience. So you might want to spend more time on the scientific explanation, and also note how it says briefly explain to a lay audience. So you don't need to spend too much time there. Also look at how the point differences are different. So the difference between acceptable and good is 4 points, where between good and exceptional is 10. So it really rewards someone who does very well on a question. So obviously try to do your best in all the questions, but just to keep that in mind. And this is all in the guidance. Each of these questions has positive and negative indicators. So it's telling you how to score well. And these examiners are going to have these in front of them. So they're going to, if you start hitting some of these positive indicators, they're going to go tick, 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 really good. So some of them are a bit more objective than others. So just keep that in mind. Go to the next slide, please. So the next question is about your academic achievement. So this is, again, more about objective things you've done, publications, prizes, etc. So look at the positive indicators. It just lists the kind of typical things that you might expect in a portfolio. So if I was you, I would just start talking about any of those that I had in that exact order. So I would talk about, if I had any additional degrees, I would talk about my publications, making sure to mention prizes, presentations, if they're local, national, international, what journals they were in. And they should make it easy for them to mark. And so essentially go through that list and they can go, oh, they're hitting all these positive indicators. They can't not give you at least a good or a very good if you're hitting those positive indicators. Next slide, please. So the next one, often, so for me, they answered this question with the other previous question in one. So this is about your practical experience. This is what I spoke about earlier, about breaking down what you did in order to achieve those publications, etc. So they really want to know what kind of things did you apply for an ethics approval? Did you run a PPI group, etc.? Because this will show that you know how academia and research works, and that's very important for the application. So this is when I would mention that aspect. So you might want to take one of your maybe proudest achievements or your biggest research projects, etc., and talk through chronologically how you what you did in that project, how you started it, how you did the actual work, how you disseminated it and published it, etc. But yeah, doing that pre-work of breaking down some of the key stuff that you did is very important. Next slide, please. Next one is about the actual post. So you should know a bit about the post and the location that you're applying to. So at a minimum, you should look at the website, look at who the local academic radiologists are, what kind of research they're doing, what kind of publications have they had recently, what specialties do they focus on. And then ideally, if there's something of particular interest to you, you should make contact with them. You should, if you're interested in neuroradiology and there's an academic, email them or try to get into contact with someone, ask them what they're doing in the future. Say that you're applying for the ACF and you're wondering what kind of projects that an ACF might be involved with. You don't have to commit to that. So let's say in the interview you talk about, oh, I'm really interested in this neuroradiology project that's going on in Cambridge, blah, blah, blah. If you get the job, you don't have to do neuroradiology, you can do something different. They're not going to hold you to it. But you need to know what's going on and at least express a kind of interest based on maybe your previous experience. Yeah, so I would always make contact if you can. And again, it's telling you these positive indicators. And the next slide, please. The next question, it asks you to talk about another area of academic medicine, clinical basic research, which is not to do with radiology or your interests. So if you've done a lot of previous work in neurology, for example, don't pick a paper that's about neurology, don't pick a paper that's about neurosurgery, don't pick a paper about radiology, pick something different. So look at the major journals, Nature, etc., in the past 6 months or so, see something that might interest you. And the key thing is finding something that you can link back to radiology, which might not seem obviously a radiology issue or research question, but think how it might impact radiology or how you might be able to use that research within radiology. So my example I used is there's a lot of work in multi-cancer detection blood tests in circulating DNA for early screening of cancers. And so I spoke about that. There's a big trial going on in the UK and how if this was proven to be effective, that impact that will have on imaging and radiology. Because if you're going to have a positive screening test for one cancer, two cancers, or even a mysterious cancer sometimes, then the next test is most likely going to be an imaging test. So if we're going to screen the whole population for multiple cancers, you can imagine what that's going to do to imaging referrals. So that's just one example I used. So if you can link it back, that will get you those kind of top marks. Next slide, please. And next will be a kind of question. It's only at 5 marks, but we'll talk about how you balance clinical and academic roles. So the important thing to remember is that you have to hit the same standards, do the same exams as all the other radiology trainees, but in theory, you have 25% less official clinical time. So you might be able to do additional time to kind of help and supplement, but you have to understand that, and they want you to appreciate that you know that, and that it's not necessarily easy, and you will have to manage your time appropriately. Particularly in radiology, you have exams in 6 months. Other specialties may not have that. You are going to a completely new specialty where you might have very little experience, and it's like learning a completely new subject. It's not like core medical training into registrar training where there is a lot of knowledge which is passed over, where in radiology often you're starting from scratch. And it's also, so specific examples that you may have day release for your academic day. So on average, 1 day a week, and you might want to say something that there might be a specific ultrasound list, which is for a certain, I don't know, they do ultrasound testes on a Monday morning, and that's the only time they do it in your centre. And you want to go because it's good for your learning, and you want to learn how to do it, or you're interested in it. So therefore, you might not be able to take your academic day every single Monday for the rest of your time because you'll never get to see that. So you need to be flexible with your clinical time and your academic time. So yeah. Next slide, please. So they're the mandatory questions. They may ask you an additional clinical question at the end. And so if this was a competition specialty, they have to make sure the question is relevant to all the free specialties. So they can't ask you a very specific radiology question or a cardiology question, which they wouldn't expect an F2 to bear to answer. So it's often emergency management of common presentations. I could envision them asking about anaphylaxis because that may be the most likely emergency management in radiology, but it's also relevant to other specialties. Or what they did for me is they asked about a kind of GMC principle, the duty of candor, in the context of a radiology scenario. So I was asked, you've just done an angioplasty for an acutely ischemic limb, and then following, you realized you treated the wrong leg. So there's asking, what would you do next? And it's about being safe and being sensible. So you want to go, okay, duty of candor, speak to the patient, apologize, tell them what's happened, be honest about your mistake, reassess and treat as necessary, patient safety. And then it's all about the following, reflect, report, follow up, etc. So those kind of things, they may be more likely to ask you because they won't expect you to have much specific radiology knowledge. And that's usually out of 5 marks. Next question, please. So in summary, I know it's a bit of a whirlwind because it's almost a whole application itself, but read the NIHR guidance. It tells you everything you need to know, and it's very transparent. Make sure you understand the academic department you're applying to, and you can and you should prepare your answers very well. And the other thing is to make sure you link it to the theme. So if the post you're applying to is linked to a theme, and all those themes are described on the NIHR website, then make sure you link your questions and your interests to that theme, because they've been told they've had some really amazing applicants that would be really good ACFs, but all of their interests were completely outside the theme of that post, so they couldn't offer it to them. So make sure you link it back. So that's it really. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Tom. So guys, you have to listen to a different genre of talk. This is more directed to people, those who want a platform which helps you develop your clinical as well as your academic skills in radiology. Thank you, Tom, for the wonderful talk. So guys, that's it. We have come to the official end of our schedule. I think now it's time for any questions and answers. We are a bit late, so we want to keep it to the minimum as possible. I also request all of our speakers to come online.
Hi, thank you guys. Thanks. That was a wonderful talk, and honestly, a lot has changed in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm towards the end of my CCT, I would say, probably in the last 6, 7 months, and with this new portfolio scoring, it was also quite new for me. And if I was in your place, I wouldn't have made it. But don't think you can't, because you can and you will. You always have to start off with that positive thinking that you will get it. So I was an international graduate. I came here, did lots of jobs. I had visa restrictions. So long story short, I always wanted to do radiology, and that's what I wanted to do, and I applied and I got in. So that's the approach you should have, and then try to score at least the things which are quite basic, and at least try to get lots of things that you can easily. Lots of people are asking questions about taster weeks. We have answered lots of questions. 2 taster weeks they have mentioned, and it's quite self-explanatory, the portfolio guidance. Again, for the posters or the presentations, whatever remarks it says, if it's a national, it's because it's as I said, it's very self-explanatory. So there shouldn't be any confusion, and try to get all those things before the application deadline closes. And MSRA, I can't stress enough, this is the most important bit, because I remember when I applied, the cutoff was like 470 something. It has gone up quite significantly over the last few years because lots of people are applying in radiology. RLMT was taken off, so everyone is basically applying. So the competition has gone quite high up. So if there are any questions we can answer. I'm afraid we don't have time to get everyone on board. So, Amin, do you see any questions which we haven't answered, or Jian?
No, I think we've been answering everything as it went along. I think everyone's satisfied.
Yeah, someone has asked about outside experience. I think some people do apply. I did have one of my juniors who came straight. Radiology training post was the first NHS job, although I wouldn't recommend it. It's always good to have some UK experience because you get to know how the systems work. Otherwise, you just land in a place and you might not find really supportive people. I've been lucky to work in departments which are quite supportive. So, yeah.
I think, Tom, you have a question. One person was asking about
Yeah.
ACF.
So it's obviously more work to do, and it's tricky. So the good thing about the ACF application is it is earlier in the sense that the online application is open now and ends in November. So you have a bit of time to do your white space questions. You don't need to spend, hours and hours and hours agonizing over it, but you do have a fair amount of time to prepare those. And you submit that in the beginning of November. And then you'll quite quickly find out if you get an interview. It's only going to be a few weeks or so. So obviously, if you don't get an interview, then you can just fully focus on the exam, etc. But you'll know your interview date, and it happens quite quickly. So again, it's quite intense, but there you will definitely usually do your interview before you even sit your MSRA exam. So again, it's hard. You've got to use your own time, and I guess I would say that you should probably prioritize the exam and the clinical application because you need to do well at that regardless of the ACF outcome. And actually, if you do really well in that, you might be in a privileged position where you get an ACF offer and you get a standard clinical offer, and you'll have a choice of maybe two places. And there might be various reasons you'd prefer for the standard place because of location, etc. But yeah, it's obviously up to you how much time you balance between the two. But yeah.
Yes, we do have WhatsApp group. I think on the feedback, if you provide your mobile number, and then we'll add you to the group. We do have trainees on the group and like lots of other candidates, and sometimes they're really helpful if you have any questions other people can answer who have been through the cycle. So yeah, and as I said, MSRA is quite important. Anton also mentioned. So I would think I was in my pediatric blocks when I sat the exam. So I took some days off. I took some annual leave to study for it. So it's really important. And so you should start now if you haven't.
I think someone asked about feedback. So on the chat, there's a feedback link, and everybody should have been automatically emailed a feedback link as well. So if you fill out the feedback, you'll also get an attendance certificate, which you can use towards your portfolios for teaching hours if you're FY1, FY2, and just general professional sort of experience as well. Siddharth, if you mentioned your email on the feedback form, I think that's one of the questions on there. We can always get your number that way. We're going to send out like a generic email so people can give their numbers and they can be added to the group as well.
Yeah, send us a message on Twitter, or one of us will add you to it. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to all the ST1s, my amazing team for doing this excellent talk, and best of luck to everyone. And just start preparing for MSRA, and don't worry too much about the portfolio score. Lots of people were asking questions. Even more than 30 is good because lots of people were not able to. It was just changed last minute last year. So I don't think there are any changes this year, but try to get as many marks as you can. But don't worry too much and don't stress over 1 marks or 2 marks if you don't have in one domain or 2 domains. You can cover it up in interview or in MSRA. Okay?
That's it, guys. Thank you for joining. Hope this was quite useful information for you guys. So, all the best, as Abir Ahmed have said, and see you all down in the line as radiologists. And hopefully, many of you would be doing these sessions next year, and Abira would be still supporting all you guys.
Okay. Thank you. Bye. Have a nice evening. Bye.